So the winter retreat progresses, and we're in the last month now of this retreat. 2 months gone. For myself, it's been a very interesting retreat and useful. Not always been pleasant, but that's all part of life. And I hope that it's been useful for everyone else that's been on the retreat, all the monks and the novices, the Anagarikas, and for all the people that have come and served the monastery during this retreat, because without the people that come here to serve, to help, the retreat would be very difficult to do, wouldn't it? We certainly need people to light the fire, chop up the wood, light the fire, do the cooking and everything else that gets done. There's a lot of work. Being here before the retreat started, one could see how much work there is to prepare the monastery for the winter retreat. One has an appreciation of the hard work that many people that have come here this year, during the year, have done to help keep this monastery running. This was the first monastery, of course. We know that I guess we pretty much all know the story of it, Chithurst, first one of the monasteries, Buddhist monasteries, Ajahn Chah's lineage, started by Ajahn Sumedho. And so it's, I've never really lived in this monastery very much. I've lived here twice before, each time for a retreat. Once was for a Wassa, and that was in 1996, and that was a time when Ajahn Sucitto put a notice up in the hallway of Amaravati, where I was living, saying that when any of the monks, when they reached their 10th Wassa, they would be welcome to come and do the Wassa in a hut in the forest here. You could come and have some time in the forest. Well, my 10th retreat had already gone by, but I still asked him if I could come, and I expected him to say no, because I didn't really know him. But he very kindly said, yes, come along. So my 11th Wassa I spent here in the Vulture's Peak. It had just been rebuilt, and I had a very nice Wassa there. That was the first time actually I'd spent some time in a hut in the forest while I was a monk. At the end of that Wassa, my brother-in-law died, just as the Wassa was coming to an end. My brother-in-law died, so I had a chance to go to see my family, my sister and her children, and both my sisters and their children. I went to the his funeral. I hadn't seen many of them for years, because I'd been in Australia before that, then New Zealand, and then Burma. So I hadn't been in England actually for quite a few years before I came back to stay at Amaravati in 1984, and then 94, beg your pardon, and then came here in 96 to spend that Wassa. And after that Wassa I went back to Australia again. So I don't really have much of a contact with Chithurst. Usually I just come here for the Katina or something like that, but twice. And in 2005 I stayed here for a winter retreat. And then that was it really, until I came back from Australia in 2015. And then I stayed here. I had 6 months in the forest, 6 months retreat, where I was completely left alone and I didn't have any duties. And that was very interesting. Not always particularly comfortable, but it was very interesting and worthwhile time actually. A long time like that, 6 months is quite a long time to spend on your own. And living in especially as I didn't really know the community here. I knew Ajahn Karuniko because we met in New Zealand when we were both much more junior monks. I met him in New Zealand, got to know him there, but I hadn't seen him for a long time since then. After that 6 months retreat, I offered to, if it was as I thought anyway, in my delusion, I guess, I said if it would be any help or useful to him, I would be willing to stay with the community for a while, if it would be helpful to him. And I sort of wanted to stay with the community anyway, because I'd never stayed really in the community before. So sort of paying back for my 6 months, paying back the rent, really, for the 6 months. And that finishes at the end of this month, and I'll be going back to Amaravati. Amaravati is a much different place than Chithurst. Well, it's quite interesting to me that although all these monasteries, they all come from the same sort of source, they're also different. They're also very different, but I guess it just reflects the abbots that run them, or the people that run them. It must be their personalities must have quite a profound effect on the way the monastery is run, what is taught, how it's taught. Not so much what is taught, but how it's taught. And of course the geographical position, situation also would make a difference. Amaravati is such a big place, and it's such a busy place. It couldn't be run in the same way that Chithurst is, because Chithurst is very quiet. It's probably the most beautiful monastery I've ever been in, actually, as regards to sheer beauty. If you're here in the spring or autumn was fantastic. It's a very beautiful place, and meditation is basically what it's all about. Whereas Amaravati has got lots to do. Lots of people to serve and lots of teachers to do. So a very different place. I didn't realise that monasteries would be so different as I have found out that they are. And of course that difference of the monastery has an effect on the people that live there, the people that are trained there. They're trained in a different way in each monastery. The training, although the training is the same, like all sames, it can be a bit different. Actually, there's nothing that is exactly the same on this planet, is there? Everything has its own difference. But so it's a bit of an education to come into another monastery, especially after so many years of being a monk and living in different countries, living in Australia and New Zealand. I spent some time in Brazil at one stage, and then visiting other countries for teachings. It has surprised me how different monasteries can be, and how different the monks that live in the monastery, the monks and the nuns, novices, how different they can be as well, their attitudes. So it is a good education, even if it is sometimes a bit of a painful one. It is a good education to go and live in different places, especially for monks. Otherwise if we stay in the same place all the time, then we become sort of conditioned by that situation. And there's in the teachings, the Buddha's teachings, it's not a case of really of conditioning, is it? When we think of education, going to become educated, or going to a place to become trained. We train here. We try, first of all, we come as a layman, then we become an anagarika, then we become a novice, and then we become a monk, and then a Thera, and all this. So we're being trained through a system. The training basically is the same, but the situation of the monastery can create quite a lot of differences, which I found quite interesting here, how different the situation is from what I experienced in Amaravati. And of course I didn't start in Amaravati, I started in Australia, in Perth. And that, again, was something different again. completely different climate, and a completely different way of running, really, a monastery. Teachings are the same now, and this is the important point, but it is interesting to see how the same teachings can be put forward differently, which goes to show that they are living teachers, living teachings. They're teachings not about books, 84,000 discourses, but actually that's not the Dhamma, is it? The Dhamma isn't about books, the Dhamma is about people. And it's about people's lives, and it's about people living. Because if you look at what the Buddha's talking about, what the Buddha, his teachings are all about, it's for human beings. The people that practice his teachings are not dogs and cats, elephants and gorillas. I mean, some of them may practice, but mostly it's about human beings, isn't it? It's about us, ordinary human beings with the usual defilements and the usual good points. We tend to think of the defilements all the time, but we forget actually that we all have many good points to our characters. It's about life, isn't it? The Dhamma is life, really. It's not about teachings in a book. They are interesting to read. But if you don't put them into practice, then they don't really do very much for you. They may interest you, but they don't do very much for you as a person. If you're interested in gaining liberation, you can read, but that won't give you liberation. It might give you a lot of knowledge, and it might make you an interesting person to talk to, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you will gain liberation, because liberation comes from practice, and what we practice is life. That's what we practice. We practice individually, life, our life, the life that we live, the life that we live together. But even though we live together, we very much still live on our own, don't we? We're all sitting here tonight. You're sitting listening to this. I don't know what you're thinking. I dread to think what some of you might be thinking. But being as I don't know, I don't have to worry too much. But in the end, the Dhamma is how we live, isn't it? How we each live our own specific lives. What we see in ourselves is Dhamma. We look at each other, and we may think we see how another person is living, but we don't really know in another person's heart, do we, or in another person's mind what they're thinking. A person could be sitting there thinking what nice people we are. We might be sitting there thinking, oh, they don't like me, or something like that, or the other way round. But the person that we do know is me. So we all know me. And that's where the Dhamma is. That's the Dhamma book for us, isn't it? It's our own life, our own mind, our own hearts, how we live. Because that's what we see. How we live is what we do through body, through speech, through the mind. And that's where the results come from, isn't it? And those results are what we live. What we call the karma, or the karma we make, the karma vipaka. Those results that come from our actions. Where else would our results come from? You could do all the most wonderful things in the world, but it doesn't really do anything for me, doesn't it? It might influence me, and it might be pleasant to have you around, but actually my life is not changed that much by what you do, unless I copy you. When I act, when I speak, when I think, or when I act physically, that's where the results come from, isn't it? This is the karma vipaka. Karma vipaka, the actions and their results. Well, when we think of actions, so we think of physical actions, don't we? But actually, what the Buddha's talking about is actions, physical actions, but the mental actions as well. And the verbal actions. Because all these are what have results for us. we speak, if we act, if we continue and we purposely act in a way, speak in a way, think in a way that is aggressive and hateful towards others, our life is not going to be happy. Our karma vipaka is not going to be what we might want called wholesome. And then when we die, as we all must, this is something we should all really think about actually, because no matter how young we are, how beautiful we are, it's not all that long before we end up as a corpse. But that's not the end the Buddha points to. That's not the end, that's just the beginning of something else, another life. What that life will be is something that we can do about with this life. We don't want to wait till the next life comes. Just hope we get something good, and we'll practice there. If we practice now, we do our best now with the teachings, with body, speech, and mind. Then, when the time comes for a new life, we've set the right results in process, and then that has a good influence on us. No one can make karma for someone else. No matter how much we love our children or our friends, we can't make karma for them. We can do good actions, maybe we might influence them, but the action, when we do good actions, the results of those actions come to us. They don't come to someone else. What we do is we try to influence them to do good actions, and then they get the results of their karma, their actions, and that comes to them. And this is how we can create, how we can change. We can create a life that will have good effect, have a good result for us. We're reborn. I think in the world, mostly people don't really understand this. They don't really understand that the actions that they do actually is going to bear results. And they don't realise actually that there is going to be a future life. A lot of people just presume that this is it. But actually, according to the Buddha, there are future lives, and that future lives comes from what we do, say, think in this life. So that's where the Dharma is, isn't it? The Dharma of practice, the Dharma of the books is information, knowledge, that we then put into action. But if we don't put it into action, then the results don't come. That which points to us to how to act, or where to act, what to act with, is mindfulness. That quality with which we can view life. We can see our life as we live. We can get to understand it. We can get a perspective on it. Because if you look at other religions, usually religions are talking about like the whatever deity it is. The deity usually doesn't like what they consider to be evil. That has to be destroyed or got rid of in some way, and that which is good, and that has to be promoted. And that's what the deity likes: the good, and doesn't like the bad. So it's to destroy the bad and then promote the good. But in Buddhism, we have this factor which we call mindfulness. And mindfulness allows us to see both the bad and the good. Because if you look into your own hearts, into your own minds, if you're honest, we do see both the bad and the good. And even like I've been a monk for quite a few years, I still see selfishness and wrong thinking, various negativities, as well as some good things as well, some good aspects to my life, good actions and good thoughts. I see both. But I don't really condemn either. I don't condemn the bad and say I shouldn't have bad thoughts or I shouldn't have bad perceptions or whatever. because that's wrong, that's wicked, that's evil, and they should be destroyed. But they are just what they are. I see good thoughts, good perceptions, and they're also what they are. Because with mindfulness, we can begin to see what the results of those are, what the results of those thoughts are, what the results of those actions are. So then we begin to see actually the result, the responsibility for living in a way in which there is the improvement in our hearts, improvements in our minds, improvements in our physical behaviour, is reliant on us. It's the actions that we do, the words that we speak, the thoughts that we think. That is where the future comes from. So that is where we need to look, right into our own hearts, right into our own minds. And mindfulness is that which helps us to do that, because with mindfulness, it's not about good and bad. Mindfulness can see both. It's not about destroying the bad and raising up the good. What we can actually see, we can gain a lot of knowledge, is when we begin to see, if we have negative thoughts, we can see the effect that they have upon us and how they change, the effect that they have upon our hearts or upon our minds, and what those effects are like when we bring them into our lives. So if we find ourselves having a lot of negative, like selfish thoughts, or we have a tendency towards that, then we'll see that the sadness that comes into our life, the unhappiness that comes into our life, is brought in by the actions that we do following those types of thoughts. So the way to change is simply to change our ways of thinking, ways of acting, ways of speaking, and then our life changes. And this is how we can use mindfulness to observe both the negative sides of our thinking, or the negative sides of our life, our being as a human being. Animals presumably can't do this, as well we're lucky as human beings. And it's not so much then is to try to force oneself to be good and force oneself not to be bad, but to see what results come from each, and then developing the qualities that change those results. Until in the end, the results that come into our life are what we create through the change in our actions, the change in our thoughts, and the change in our speaking. In other words, we create our own suffering, so we can create our own happiness as well. And mindfulness allows us to do this because it allows both to come into our observation. When I became a monk in Australia in 1986, I was a novice in 1985. I was already about 43, so I wasn't young. 43 isn't young, actually. I'd had 10 years in the army, or 9 years in the army, and I'd been working, electrician, for some years. So I sort of hadn't been passively sitting around reading books. So I'd lived some sort of life, and some of it was a bit rough, I guess. I come from a working class background, as probably you can, at least the English people amongst you can probably hear. I come from North London, next to the railway lines. So when I came in my mid-40s into the Sangha, I'd already lived the sort of life most people live. And what I found is, I had known this before, but one of the things I noticed was that I had a certain amount of anger. I could get very angry, very, very angry inside. I also was quite a jealous person. I had. It was quite easy for me to become jealous of other people. Jealous because they were better than me, or jealous because they got things that I wanted. Whether I wanted them or not really was not the thing. The thing is that they got them, and then I would get jealous. So I would feel these sort of... Well, now outside in the wicked world of that most of us live in, these things didn't really notice very much, actually, because most people are like this to certain levels. So I sort of knew I had these things. There was something inside that told me that I had a tendency to get angry very easily, and that there was jealousy there. But it was just that sort of, well, that's life. That's how we are. But once you shave your head and put on brown robes, these things are not supposed to be there. So once I shaved my head and put on the robes, unfortunately they didn't disappear. They were still there. And that's when I really began to notice them. I began to notice when people made me angry, which they often did. And how angry I used to get, but I used to keep it all inside. But just because, and I wasn't expressing it, but just because I wasn't expressing it, it was still there. It was quite painful, actually. And then I also noticed how jealous I could get of things. I would be jealous of people getting, some other monks getting things that I didn't even want, actually. But I wasn't jealous of the thing, I was jealous that they were getting it, receiving it, and I wasn't. And I was quite surprised at this. I was quite surprised how strong it was. So I contemplated this, and I thought, well, what do I do with this? How do I do this? So I began to see that actually, with mindfulness, I could allow the anger. It would arise anyway. I wasn't allowing it, but it would arise anyway. But I would be able to see it, and I see that it was inappropriate. Now I'm a monk. This was a good thing, actually. When I was a layman, I didn't see it as inappropriate, actually. I just went along with it. I could see this as inappropriate. So I began to sort of have a sense of taking responsibility for it. So it would arise towards someone I was, say, with or talking to or whatever, and anger would arise. Then I would allow it. I would look at it quite, and see that it was there, see it quite clearly. But then I would make an effort not to put it onto the other person, not to let the other person see that, but really just to take responsibility for it, for myself, and speak and act towards the other person in a friendly way. I started to do this very early in my life as a novice, actually. Just by taking responsibility. What surprised me was I could do this because I could see the anger, I could observe it, watch it, feel it, and it was there. And I could see the unwholesomeness of it, but then I could see that the other person, that the anger was arising around, actually really wasn't responsible for it, that it was mine, that it was me. And so I could act, it's like separate the two. I didn't feel I had to squash the anger, get rid of it, cut it away, or anything like that. And I didn't feel I had to express it to the person, but I just would see both. I would see the person, and then I would see the anger as separate things. And that allowed me to speak to the person or to interact with the person without dumping any sort of my own defilements, kilesas on him. And but I didn't have to get rid of the anger either. I didn't feel that I had to squash the anger. The anger was still there, but it was inside. It was something that I was holding inside. I was holding it in my heart, really. And I noticed that gradually it began to weaken after a time, and practiced this, it began to weaken. And gradually it began to dissipate, and my anger began to sort of subside. Because it wasn't so much that people were making me angry, it was just sort of, a lot of my anger came from repression. I was quite a repressed person when I lived outside. I didn't know how to, I never really learned how to express myself to other people. So I was always blocking up a lot of stuff inside. And that's where, of course, anger comes from, isn't it? A lot of anger comes from that. I began to see that, I clearly see that. So I could begin to take responsibility for it. But it was interesting that the Buddha's teachings, as I understood them and learnt them, was I didn't have to squash it. I didn't have to get rid of it. I didn't have to deny it in any way. But it was okay. It was okay to have anger, to be angry. But it's not okay to be angry if we're going to start expressing it. We're going to use anger in such a way that we actually increase it, and then we get results from that within our own hearts, within our own minds. And the other thing was the jealousy. Not quite sure why I had so much jealousy, or maybe that comes from the repression as well. Don't know. But I saw the jealousy as the same thing. But the jealousy I found rather humorous, especially when I saw myself being jealous for things that I didn't really want, but was just jealous of the fact that the other person got it. So what I found very useful with the teachings, this was in the very early days when I was still struggling to learn, was that you could look at yourself in this way. You could look at your various aspects, the good, the bad and the ugly. There's an old film in the 60s, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Yes, that's us, isn't it? The good, the bad and the ugly. Who isn't? Who doesn't have those things in them? That which is, we have our good sides, and then we have our bad sides, and then we have our ugly sides. But the trick is to be able to see them, to let them arise, but not put them onto others, or to promote them within oneself. So when they arise, with the Buddha's teachings, as we learn the Buddha's teachings, the teachings themselves don't change us, do they? Knowing the teachings doesn't change us. But when defilement arises in the mind, what do we do when we see this? When we see, say, the anger arises in my mind, I see the pain that gives me. It causes me, it used to cause me quite a lot of pain in my heart. And then I would see, yes, that's what comes from anger that has been stored for many years, maybe. So what is the other way to go? And of course, then if we look at the four divine abidings, or we look at the precepts themselves that tell us what actions to do and what to avoid, or we look at the 10 parami, which are qualities that the Buddha encourages us to develop, then we see, this is, so if my anger, need to develop some loving kindness. Because that's the way, isn't it? The destruction of anger is not through giving in. Some people think that if you're angry, if you give in to it, or you express it, and then you'll get rid of it. But the Buddha doesn't say that, does he? He says if you develop the opposite, it's opposite. He gives us all these through the precepts, through the parami, through the four divine abidings. He gives us these qualities to develop. And in developing those, these other defilements or rather sad ways of being disappear. They disappear by themselves. So it's not that we have to destroy them because they're evil or promote them in themselves because they're good or whatever, but it's the way we act. How we act has a result. Through body, speech and mind. If we act in the right way, developing the right qualities, then that's what we become. A lot of people don't realise this. They think if they act out their negativities in some way, that in some way or other that will get rid of them. according to the Buddha's teachings. And this is the usefulness of this quality of mindfulness. Mindfulness different, say, to samadhi. In samadhi, when we want to develop samadhi, then we focus on one thing and we clear everything else out of the way, focusing on that one thing till we develop samadhi, our ability to focus and stay focused on one object. For mindfulness, you don't have to get rid of things for mindfulness. With mindfulness, we can see what's there, whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's ugly. These are just what it is. But once we see them clearly, then with the Buddha's teachings, we use the Buddha's teachings, and we see, well, okay, that's there, and maybe they're strong in me, but what I have to do is to start developing that which is opposite to them. It's not a matter of destroying them, but gradually to sort of cut them away by developing those qualities that are opposite. Because you can't have the two together. Now, if we're, say, jealous and selfish, and then we start to develop, using the teachings and friendship with others, we start to develop generosity in our hearts, then eventually the selfishness and the jealousy will just disappear. We don't have to do anything, we don't have to cut it away or bash it away, it will just disappear because it has been replaced. And this is the beauty of the Buddha's teachings, the beauty of mindfulness, is that it allows us to see the bad and the ugly as well as the good. We see, because none of them are self anyway. They are just what is attached to us, that we take notice of, that becomes part of us. Yesterday I went, I was going to go for a walk into Midhurst. I wanted to go to the doctor's clinic. So I was going to walk there. It's quite a nice day, the rain had stopped. So I started out. I got about halfway there. And I was having a lot of trouble with my feet. It's old age. I think I got this thing called, what's it called? Plantar fasciitis or something. It's something in the soles of your feet. And my feet were getting quite painful actually as I was walking. I was about halfway there actually. And then I got onto a road that had a lot of really fast cars driving on it. I turned onto a road and I was walking up the side of this road, and there was some cars. It was sort of uphill, and they were really rushing uphill. And I felt quite uncomfortable walking on this road, so I got off to one side. I found a little culvert, and I went and sat in this culvert, looked on the map, and then I found out I'd turned left instead of right, so I was actually going on the wrong road. So I went back down to where I started, and then I decided, because my feet were hurting me so much, that I wasn't going to carry on to Midhurst, because if I got to Midhurst, I would then have to walk all the way back to the monastery, which would be twice as long walk, and with these really painful feet. So I decided to come back from where I was. So I started back, and as I walked along, my feet got worse, more and more painful. And then I came to a junction, and I looked on the map, and I saw just down the road from the junction there was a bridge. There was I forget the name of it now, and there's a large building there. What's the name? Stedham, is it? I think Stedham. Most of you probably know it. There's a big building there, and you can see from the bridge. And I wanted to see it. I wanted to go down and see it. So I decided to walk down to this bridge and have a look. And as I started to walk down this road, I began to really enjoy the countryside, because I'd got off. There was no traffic there. It was quiet, and I could see across the fields. Could see the pylons and the horses in the fields, and I began to really enjoy just walking through the country, walking along the country lanes, because I like the country lanes. And I noticed, while I was enjoying the surrounding country, I sort of let go of the pain in my feet. The pain in my feet was just exactly the same. It was very painful. But as I enjoyed my enjoyment of the country, I let go of the pain in my feet. And then I was walking along, and then when I come to an area that wasn't very interesting, I noticed my attention went back to the pain in my feet again, because they were very painful. And I was actually walking slower and slower, because taking little footsteps, so it was bearable. But this happened a few times, and when I got to the bridge, which is quite a lovely bridge, and I could see this lovely building, my attention went to that, and I really enjoyed viewing that, looking at it, looking at the river. And then I noticed that I didn't really take much notice of the pain in my feet. I could bear both. I didn't get rid of it; it didn't go away. It was still there. But as my attention went to one, and I was mindful of that aspect, say the countryside, the road, the horses, whatever, in the fields, and I enjoyed that aspect of it, then the pain in that just went into the background. But when there was nothing to look at, the pain would come forward, and my attention would go to the pain in my feet. So they were both there, the enjoyment of the countryside, but also of the painful aspect of walking. And one would come in, and then one would go out. So I was able to keep walking and enjoy the countryside as well. And I walked along the river from Stedham to Chithurst, and I noticed that this, as my mindfulness, when I was mindful, walking mindfully and enjoying the country, then the pain in the feet wasn't so dominant. But when there was nothing to look at or nothing to enjoy in the countryside, then the pain in my feet would take over, and then all my attention would be on this painful walking. So it was interesting to see that I didn't have to get rid of one of them to view the other, to see the other. It's just that they came and went naturally as I walked along. I was fairly mindful in my walking. I came up through the Chithurst, had a looked in the church, and then came back to the monastery. I was really glad to get back in the end, because my feet were hurting such a lot. And yeah, I had enjoyed my walk. How could I enjoy my walk if I got all these pain in my feet? It's mindfulness, isn't it? One was the fact that I could be mindful of both in turn, mindful of the beauty of the countryside, mindful of the pain in my feet. I wasn't trapped by one. They could both be there, and each one was seen in turn, which allowed me freedom. The pain in my feet was there, but I was sometimes free of it. Not because it went, but because I was more interested in other things. And when I lost that interest in the other thing, then the pain came forward again, and my mindfulness was absorbed into that, and that was quite unpleasant. So what the Buddha points to in life is that we don't have to be perfect to practice. You don't have to be perfect to become a monk or a nun or novice or whatever, or to be a person, to be a human being. Because we're all good, we're all bad, and we're all ugly, in some sense. But we don't have to get rid of any of it. But as we see it, as it comes into our view, as it does through the day, sometimes the ugly part of us comes in, doesn't it? The selfish, meany, nasty, horrible sort of person comes into view, doesn't it? And we can act that out if we're not careful. And yeah, that is part of us. Like when I become a monk, yeah, the anger was part of me, and this jealousy was part of me. The repression that I'd had in my heart, in my mind, that was still part of me. Just becoming a monk didn't get rid of it. It was still there. And it became all part, and it was all part of my practice. as I lived as a monk over the years, it's been there. I haven't had to destroy it. But as one develops mindfulness, one can see it as it arises. And then one sees when an unpleasant aspect of our personality arises, we can see the suffering that we get from that. But then we can contemplate then what has to be developed. So it's not a matter of destroying the nasty bits, but of developing the nice bits. And then the nasty bits disappear of themselves. So unlike other teachings, religions and philosophical teachings, this idea that we've got to destroy the evil, we've got to destroy all the nasty things in the world, that's different to the Buddha's teachings. With mindfulness, we can allow anything to be there, anything that is part of us. But what we have to see is, if we allow that to manifest, like in our life, or if we promote it, the suffering that comes from it, we have to be honest. So when I had my anger, I could see the suffering that came from that when I first became a monk, or when I was jealous. Jealousy is basically a hell realm. If you've ever been really jealous, you know what it's like. It is the most dreadful mental state to be in, jealousy, because it's totally irrational. And yet, you can't really destroy it. You may think, I'd like to destroy it, I'll be rid of it. But what I saw was, if one practices the opposite, what is the opposite to jealousy? Friendliness, metta. Well, the Buddha points that, doesn't he? He points to metta. Being generous and careful of other people's sensitivities, feelings. When we develop that in ourselves, then these negative qualities, jealousy, they diminish gradually and then they disappear. And what's left in their place is the opposite, because we've developed the opposite. And this is why we don't destroy all the negative sides of ourselves. We look at it and see, well, what is this pointing to that is missing? When we develop that opposite, the jealousy is gone. But that's not the end of the story, because there's something has been left in its place. And it's that which was the opposite of it. So that jealousy maybe is a loving kindness or whatever it is. And when we look at the Buddha's teachings, the four divine abidings, they're quite practical things. We can develop them. They're not that difficult. The 5 precepts, some people find the 5 precepts are a bit more difficult, or aspects of them perhaps. Still, they're there. They're there for us to use. And then the 10 parami, qualities of the 10 parami. And this is the practice for us, because this is Dhamma. Our life is the Dhamma. Our kilesa, as they manifest in our life, is the Dhamma. And the opposite qualities with which we can develop to get rid of those kilesa are the Dhamma. So it's not that difficult, really, for us to practice. We just need a sense of purpose, a determination to do really what we have to do, to develop what we need to develop. It's not that hard, because we don't actually have to get rid of anything. We don't have to bash something out that is strong in our character, in our personality. What we have to do is develop its opposite, which is not so difficult, actually. It's not so difficult to develop friendliness or kindness or generosity. They're things that we can develop as human beings. And once they're developed, those negative opposites have gone. So mindfulness, which is taught in the Buddha's teaching, Ajahn Sumedho is a great proponent of mindfulness. And mindfulness is a quality that is very, very important for us. It's very useful for us, and it stands as the basis of our practice, really, the grounding of our practice. As I found out yesterday, walking along the road with my painful feet, and yet enjoying the countryside. How can it be? So there's no need to read 84,000 discourses. You can if you like, but it'll take up a lot of your time that you might be spent doing more practical things. Because the Dhamma, the practice of Dhamma, is within each one of us. To be known by the wise, each for themselves. This is in the one of the chants we have, isn't it? To be seen here and now, timeless. It invites us to come and see. It's an open invitation. The Dhamma, the Buddha's teachings, not a matter of killing anything off, it's just an open invitation to come and see. To come and see what? To come and see what needs to be done. And it leads us inwards, not outwards looking at everyone else. A tendency in the world, isn't it, is to look out at others, point everybody else's faults out. We all do it, let's face it. And yet, the Dharma, the real Dharma practice, the Buddha's teachings, points us inwards, to be known by the wise, each for themselves. Well, once you know it, then you're wise. And wisdom comes from the understanding and the knowing of the Dharma that we get when we practice. We don't know the Dharma just by reading it in books. We might know of it, but we don't know it. The real knowing comes from practice. And practice brings it into our being and changes us. And then when we die peacefully without any worries. Because our rebirth is already taken care of. So that is enough for this evening.